Hi everybody, it is week 4, we finally made it. It is our KAL, an adventure in cardigan knitting, which we started at the beginning of January, and we have made it to the end of the month. I don't think any of us have finished our cardigans, but we shouldn't feel bad about that. It is quite a project to take on. The needles were quite small, 4 millimeter or 3 3/4 or 3 1/2 for some of us. So that is going to take us into February, which is perfectly fine because February is Finish It February. So that way we have lots of extra time and no guilt, and we can just finish it in our own time. January is known as Selfish Knitting Month, so it was the perfect opportunity to start something, hopefully for yourself and not for anyone else. So yes, I'd like to welcome some of our new knit-alongers who joined us since last week. Hi to Selena. She has picked up her yarn to start her cardigan, and I think she'll be on here at some point today, so we can say hi to her in the comments. So a quick recap for anybody who is just joining us and has no idea what we're knitting. We picked 3 different options to cover beginner level, intermediate, and advanced. So this was the beginner project choice, olive basket. You can find the pattern on Ravelry, and I'll provide the links down below a little bit later on today. Very simple construction. Borders are knit in as you go, so you don't have to pick up stitches on the front bands. It's a combination of stocking stitch and double seam stitch. So very, very simple. And I know quite a few of you are enjoying working on your olive basket. And then the intermediate level is Mary Shen. This is designed by Isabel Kramer, who's very well known on Ravelry. Her patterns read very easily, lots of extra information, and she provides an example here. She provides a different chart for every size. So that is clear as a bell. Not many designers do that. So this is a top-down cardigan with lace panels in the front, and optional if you'd like to put one in the back. Some of you did. And raglan increases for the sleeves. And there are borders to pick up after, and the neckline too, and buttonholes to make. So that was for intermediate knitters. And then we have the one that I'm working on. This is option number 3, the advanced level, and it is called Blendon Woods Cardigan. It is a design by Carrie Bloomer, and it incorporates a lot of different cable techniques on the front, 2 fronts and the back. It's knit from the bottom up, so you'll be doing quite a few seams and picking up the stitches for the big shawl collar. The sleeves are worked in a honeycomb cable stitch without the center panel cables. So those were the 3 options that we had to choose from. And the yarn, of course, is in front, and I did get a new shipment this week of 2 new colors. Beautiful fuchsia tone with a blue base and a teal blue. And then I did get a bit more of the red. So altogether what we have in stock or restock is the red, the plum, the navy, the olive green, and the 2 new colors, the fuchsia and the teal. And I'll just bring a skein of each of those over so you can see up close the little flecks. So this is the teal. I would say it leans more to the blues than the greens. see flecks of cherry red, lilac green, and I think there's a navy blue fleck in there too. And then the other new color just makes me feel very warm today staring at it. This one has flecks of dark burgundy, lilac, hot pink, and a charcoal. So those are two new shades to brighten up our January. And this is a 100-gram skein. It's the Echo Tweed DK, so it works up perfectly to a DK tension. It has 350 meters, which is unheard of for this weight of yarn. And it is a combination of organic wool, alpaca, and lyocell. So it's very, very soft to the touch and very natural and rustic feeling. And we also have our draw prize over here. I'm not going to move it because my whole little display will topple on me. The draw will be next week, same time as today, next Friday, and it will be a live draw. So anybody who has joined up for the knit along and purchased the yarn has a ballot in our draw bucket, as well as an incentive ballot if you've won one of the trivia quiz questions during the previous 3 weeks. We'll have one again later today. And yeah, it's a beautiful prize. We have Muskoka Yarn Connection coffee mug. We have some of these from Knitter's Pride. These are the circular needle point protectors. So there is a set of 3 in orange, turquoise, and fuchsia in the prize. And there are 2 pattern books from Capita, knitting and crochet, and a beautiful skein of cotton merino natural yarn. I can see some antique vintage scissors, and there might be a few more things in there too. So it's a nice prize, and somebody will be the winner next week. We just have to wait 7 more days. And as you can see, it's 50 more days till spring, so we're counting that down too. Not that we hate winter, but who doesn't love hearing the birds sing and see the first bloom in the garden? So that will be happening a couple more months. So yeah, what else has happened? Yes, so I've been working on my Blendon Woods cardigan. I'm now doing the left front, which has the cable panel against the opening and the honeycomb cable stitch for the center front. But I've had a few knitting hiccups this week. Has anyone else had that happen during the knit along, or this week in particular? It seems to be a few of us have had trouble focusing on our knitting. And yesterday, I just don't know what was going on, but I ended up ripping out at least 4 to 5 inches because I had knit all the way up to the underarm, which is about 18 inches for my length. So I was up as high as the back, up to here. And then I suddenly realized that I had not started the front neckline shaping, which starts all the way back at 14 inches. So rip, rip, rip. I don't put lifelines in, and I don't rip, I don't keep my needle in and undo 1 row at a time. I just take it right off the needle and I rip it right back. And then I just pick up the stitches and do a little bit of repair work if I have to, if any of the stitches have dropped. And then I realized that I'd also made a mistake in a cable down another 2 inches. So at this point I'd ripped 4 inches back, and then I realized I had worked one of the side cables an extra 2 rows up. So back I went to fix that. And then I realized I had made a mistake in the OXO cable at the side edge. I'll bring it up so you can see a bit closer the cables I'm talking about. So I had a lot of fixing to do, and all I can think is that there was a full moon last night, so maybe that affects our knitting, and we have these little hiccups along the way. And then I did set down my knitting for just half a minute to make a cup of tea, and I came back, and my cat, very well known for chewing yarn in half, she had decided to chew the yarn in half, so I had to do some joining in the middle of the row. But you know, she's cute, so what can I say? So this is the front section. Starts with the 2x2 rib, knit 2, purl 2. And here we have the honeycomb cable, which is really going to stretch out to a more circular motif when it's blocked. And then we have the zigzag cable and the OXO cable, which will be right against the front ribbing when I pick up the border. So I am finished all the A-line shaping on the front. You can see how the two cables are getting closer and closer together. And now they'll continue with just a couple stitches apart for the rest of the fronts. So A-line shaping in the back and also on both fronts. And I did here also knitting hiccups from, hi Gwyneth, hi Tammy, happy Friday to you in Stratford. I'm sure you have a little bit of snow there. We have, probably about a foot of snow at this point. Hi Cindy, and hi Shelley, thanks for joining. Yeah, so knitting hiccups. Knit-alongers have admitted to me now. I had one at the door this week, and she was working on her Mary Shen cardigan in a beautiful blue, which is sold out, so I don't even have a skein to show you. And she was almost at the border. The ribbing is the border at the bottom because she was knitting top down. And I guess she looked at it closely and she realized that she had made a mistake in the double seed stitch, which to most of us we probably wouldn't notice if she was wearing it, but as you know, knitters, if they know there's a mistake somewhere, they will rip it back and fix it. So that's what she did. So she ripped back about 8 inches, maybe more, and she sent me a picture I think yesterday, so I think she's back down to the top of the border. So she's made up for lost time. Another knit-alonger had a knitting hiccup, and it really wasn't her fault at all. It was a couple nights ago she got up briefly. She has a puppy, and the puppy ate into her knitting. She's also doing Mary Shen. So there was a big chunk, a big mess, stitches. Her circular needle cord had been chewed by the puppy, and yeah, so she had to do some ripping back and some repair work too, and then come to town and purchase a new cord for her interchangeable Knitter's Pride needles. So that's 3 of us now, and I can only blame it on the full moon. Full moon and the fact that yesterday was so cold, and when it's that sort of temperature, your brain just freezes. Did anybody else have any knitting hiccups this week? Happy Friday, Debbie. Chilly Buffalo. Yeah, Buffalo always gets quite a wind chill, similar to Muskoka. Sometimes it can be quite damp if there's not enough snow on the ground to insulate it. And Cindy had a bad knitting day. Bonjour, Suzanne. Oh, Gwyneth is admitting too. She's ripped out more than she's knit lately, yes. I think we're all just kind of having trouble focusing on our stitches and getting into that rhythm. I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe some warm weather, turning off the news, nice cup of chamomile tea maybe. I don't know. Okay, so today what I'm going to do, as we're not really near the finishing stage, most of us, but we have to stay on schedule anyway. I am going to show you, as promised, how to create button loops on your cardigan. So this would be useful on the olive basket, which doesn't have any buttonholes worked in, and it will also be useful on the Blended Woods cardigan because it has a big ribbed front which crosses over and a shawl collar, but it doesn't have any buttonholes worked into the pattern. The only one that has the buttonholes worked into the ribbing is Mary Shen. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do button loops with a crochet hook. I'll bring it up to the camera. I'm also going to demonstrate how to pick up stitches so you know what to do when you're ready to pick up your front borders on option number 2 and option number 3, and also neck stitches for option number 2. There might be a few demos happening. Sewing the seams, we really do prefer to do the mattress stitch, which is an invisible seam. It's worked on the right side of your garment, and it is so invisible that you'll have people stopping you in the grocery store, hopefully not touching you during these times, but they will think that you have knit the whole sweater on a circular needle. So that one, I don't really have enough of my side seams to show you, but I will post a link, a very good link, to the mattress stitch, so you can have a look there. And then also the sequence of seams. A lot of people are not really sure when they're following a pattern instruction. Sometimes it just says sew seams, or sometimes it will say finish garment. But generally what we like to do is finish the shoulder seams first, because that will hold the back and the fronts together and give it a little bit of structure. And we don't put the sleeves until the very end. The reason for that is if there is finishing to do at the neckline or the front borders, or if there's pockets, you don't want to have the extra weight of the sleeves while you're working on a straight or circular needle, and you have to constantly flip your garment over, go onto the wrong side, flip it over again, go onto the right side. So with the sleeves attached, it is a bit cumbersome. When you're doing a top-down cardigan like number 2, you don't have the option of, well, you would have the option if you didn't finish knitting the sleeves, but really you're supposed to finish knitting the sleeves and the body because it's all in one, and then you pick up and do your borders after. So the sequence of seams is referring to option number 1 and number 2. So shoulders, either the 3-needle bind off, as we showed last week in the video, or if you're sewing your shoulder square, that's perfectly fine, option number 3. And then we sew up side seams up to the underarm on option number 3. And then we start doing the borders, picking up and knitting the borders and all that good stuff. Then once the borders are done, you can sew in your sleeves. That's really the best way to do it. And then the last demo is to show you how to hide your ends in the shadow stitches. So of course on a small front like this, I can figure out how much yarn I need to get to the end of my row before I start a new ball. If I have a cat who chews the yarn, then I may end up with joining a new tail of yarn in the center. But because the pattern is very, very textured, that creates a little bit of a shadow effect. You'll see some stitches are raised on the front and some stitches are raised towards the back. So I'm going to show you how you can hide your ends invisibly into the pattern work. That works well on option number 3 near the cables, and option number 1, because you're working the cardigan all in the round, there's no side seams, you can try to get to the edge of your border. You don't want to join the yarn on the outside edge of the border because it's going to leave a little bump and an uneven stitch. If you have to do it, it's fine. This is just helpful information or tips for next time. But it's more effective if you can hide the ends before the border, and then you have a nice clean edge. Because remember, that border is permanent. There's no picking up stitches there and no places to hide the ends. On option number 2, because you're working in the round, it's a little bit harder to sew in the ends in the stocking stitch. It's more visible, especially in a very light spun yarn like our Echo Tweed. So if you can make it to somewhere where you have a lace panel or your texture stitch, which is your double seed stitch, that is the best place to hide the ends. Hi Julie. Debbie, when using the mattress stitch, do you block before seaming? No, I think a lot of designers ask you to block the pieces and try to get the same width and length as on the schematics in the pattern. But I always say to our knitters when we have our classes that it's best to block your whole garment when it's finished, because that way you can block the seams too. And the seams can be quite bumpy sometimes if you're using a thicker yarn, so it's nice to be able to flatten those out too. So definitely sew it together and then do the blocking, which I'll go into. And what is Julie saying? That beautiful blue wool in the bin next to you. I think it must be this one. This is the new teal color that came in, and it is the featured yarn for the knit-along, Echo Tweed DK. It has a blue undertone. This has a blue undertone. It's a tweed, so there's little flecks of other colors going through it, and it's all organic. It's a mixture of wool, alpaca, and lyocell. I'll bring the 3 patterns up to show you again, Julie, up to the camera. We did get in some new mother of pearl buttons, Gwyneth. They're very small. I'll show you those against the camera too. If I forget, just remind me. Okay, so I'm going to show the 3 pictures of the patterns at the camera. And I will put the links down below so you can see all the information on Ravelry. So this is option number 1, olive basket. That's the beginner level. And then option number 2 is Mary Shen. That's a top down with directional increases, some lace work, no cable, and double seed stitch. Sleeves are plain, and the borders are knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. And then option number 3, the one I'm working on the table, is Blended Woods cardigan. So this is our more advanced level because of the cable work, and it is seamed. It's not a top down, and the body is not worked in the round. So those are the 3 options that we had for the knit along, and you can really participate at any time because the videos stay in our video section, and they will be posted on YouTube, and the tips and tutorials should be still in the event section. I don't think they'll go away. Oh, thanks Sharon. I was really cold today, opening the door for curbside pickups, and so I had to have something cozy around my neck, and this is actually a shawl, but it works well as a scarf too. Okay, so did I forget? Oh yes, buttons. I'll be right back. So the new buttons I received this week in the little teacup are, there's 2 sides to them. I call it abalone. It's a type of seashell, so it's all natural, not man-made, not plastic. And it has shades of aqua, teal, blue, pink, and green. The reverse side is more of a natural, almost looks like a coconut shell. It's very natural. So you have two options. The button is not completely flat. It is concave, so that picks up the light. I'll hold it against the skein of yarn just so you can see how it looks. Size-wise, it is the size of, I'd say it's between a nickel and a dime. Probably closer to a nickel. Okay, so if you had the teal color, that would pick up the shading perfectly. And if you had the fuchsia, which I know nobody does because it's just brand new, the delivery, you can see how it picks up the pinks. It's one of my favorite types of buttons for that reason. It changes in the light and it adapts to the yarn that you're putting it with. And I think it would also work well on the navy. And the plum has tweed flecks of hot pink in it. Oh, and actually it really looks pretty on the olive green. I wasn't thinking that that would make the color pop, but now I can see a little bit of gold in the button, and there are gold flecks in the yarn. So yes, those are the new buttons. They're the smaller size, which might be nice for the Mary Shen cardigan. It's a dressy cardigan and it doesn't need a big chunky wooden button. A small wooden button would be nice too. Okay, so I'm going to show you with my crochet hook. You really don't need any crochet skills to make a button loop. It's very, very simple. We're just going to do a chain stitch. So a button loop can be made anywhere you like along the edge of the front opening. This is the front edge before I put my ribbing on. So I'm going to position my hook, always go under 2 bars from the edge. One is just not strong enough. And then what I do is I take a bit of my yarn, but I want to work with double thickness. So I make sure I'm holding it double, and I make a loop, not a slip knot, just a single loop over my hook. And I'm just going to bring that through the edge. Okay, and then to do a chain stitch, you should be holding the yarn, double strand of course, over your index finger in your left hand. And we're just going to bring the double strand through the loop, tighten it up a bit. Now, depending on the size of your button, that's the important part, I generally do about 5 chain stitches. So each little V, you're counting as a chain stitch. So I would say for this size of yarn, 5 chain stitches would accommodate a button that was about the size of a quarter. And then I would count down about 3 stitches, go back under the edge, 2 bars under, and then I just bring the yarn through and through the stitch on my hook. And there you have a button loop. And then I would cut the yarn, sew it into the back, and then I would go down and repeat the same method wherever I think I need a button loop. These are great to do about every 5 inches apart. Sometimes you just need 1 button loop. And if you're just doing 1 button loop, you want it to be right at the, on the blended woods, there's a V-neck shaping. So you want it to be about an inch below where the V-neck shaping starts. On the olive basket, you also have a V-neck shaping. So you could just put it on the edge about an inch down, and then because there's quite a wrap over on the front, the border is not a simple, 1 or 2 inch fold over. This is about 3 or 4 inches. Then you could position your button just on the very edge of the textured border. Not the outside edge, the inside edge. And generally what I do is I try on my cardigan once it's blocked, and then I stand in front of the mirror and I just look and I say, okay, I'd like a button here, I'd like 1 button here. It's useless to put a button at the very bottom of your border because you can't sit down with the button closed unless you have a very wide cardigan. You're always going to have it open, and it's just not effective. So generally the buttons would start from mid-chest, every 3 to 5 inches apart, and button loops are always the way to go. If you're not sure if you even want buttons, wear the cardigan for a few times, maybe put a brooch or a shawl pin through it, and then if that isn't staying in place and you don't like the look, then you can go back and decide to put button loops on. So that is the first demo, and now I'm going to show you how to pick up your border stitches. Just have to untangle myself. I can't afford to have any more knitting hiccups. I have to make up for lost time this weekend and get back in my stride. So now we're going to be picking up stitches, pretending that I had finished my front. And of course I need a circular needle because it's so many stitches. But for demonstrating, I'm just going to use the short straight needle. So again, we're going in 2 bars from the edge. So 2 bars from the edge takes up your whole edge stitch. And then you have to have some yarn, of course, to work with. Okay. So I'm just putting my yarn over the needle and I'm bringing it back through the same stitch. So that's what they call picking up and knitting a stitch along the edge. And generally when you're doing a ribbed border, which is what you're doing on number 2 and number 3 option, we want to get 3 stitches out of every 4 rows. So I've picked up stitch number 1, and now I'm going down to the next stitch and picking it up. So that's 2 stitches out of 2 rows, and then I'm picking up the 3rd stitch, that's row 3, and then I'm skipping the 4th row. So when you see a little hole here at the edge, that's the one you're skipping. So 3 stitches for 4 rows, and then we start all over again. 1, 2, 3. So you can see I've got a gap in between. That was the 4th row or the 4th stitch that I skipped. 1, 2, 3, skip, 1, 2, 3, skip, 1, 2, 3. That will help you get the correct number of stitches according to what your pattern recommends. And this is the technique that you use for picking up when the border is worked in ribbing, not when it's worked in moss stitch or garter stitch. Different formula for every type of border. And for those of you who have the round neck version, the Mary Shen version, this is the way to pick up stitches for fronts when you have a straight front. But on Mary Shen, you're going to have the neckline, which is curved. So it's exactly the same as what you see on the underarm here of my cardigan. So we're picking up one stitch for every stitch that's being cast off. That's the initial shaping that you're going to see on your neckline. And then we're going to pick up one stitch for every decrease that was done. So if you had to cast off 2 stitches or 3 stitches, you have to make one stitch in each of those 3 or 2. Here I've got a decrease, so I would just pick up one stitch, one stitch, one stitch, and then as soon as I get up to the straight edge, then I start doing my 1, 2, 3, skip 1, 2, 3. So an example of picking up in the first cast off shaping, we're going under the first 2 bars, and we're going to put the yarn around and pull it through, and then we go into the next 2. Bring the yarn around and pull it through. That way you don't get any gaps, and you're getting the appropriate number of stitches for the shaped area. So that is for the round neck version on Mary Shen, which is also worked in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. And then I wanted to show you how to hide your ends. So I need my darning needle. I always use the Clover bent darning needle, so much easier. And I guess I can use this big piece again. Okay, so when you look at the back of a textured pattern, you can see that there are a lot of stitches that stand out towards you if you're facing the back of it. So those are the stitches that are good for hiding your ends. Instead of sewing in your ends horizontal, we're going to go vertical. So I better thread up some yarn. So I would never have to feel guilty about not starting a new ball of yarn at the outside edge when I have a textured pattern, because I know I can hide the ends and they will not pop through onto the right side of the work, and they will not be evident. So I would say probably here or somewhere into the honeycomb would be a good place for me to run out of yarn and start a new ball. So where the 2 ends run out, I would be sewing down with one end, up with the other, just so it's not too bulky in one area. And if you look at the knit stitch, you can see there's a sharp outline. So what we're doing is picking up the outer side of it. So we're picking up each bar, and we're always sewing in the same direction. So coming from the inside of the stitch, I'm sewing to the outside. And I just grab each bar as I go down like a ladder. And then I would sew for about 2 inches. If your yarn is slippery, this one isn't, then you could just start coming back on the opposite side of the knit stitch. Or you could sew down a little bit longer. But if you didn't see my end showing as a giveaway, you wouldn't even know that I had sewn in to the shadow stitch there. So that is a perfect spot to hide any ends. And if you're into the back of the cables and you run out of yarn, you can just aim for one of these edges where the knit stitch changes to a purl. That's what creates the shadow stitch. And then of course you can sew in your your ends into the seam. So we don't sew in the edge yarns where you've started and ended until we've done our seams. Once you sew the seams of your cardigan, then you're going to have a little channel where you can run the ends up, catch a stitch, and run them down. Try to cover 2 inches one way, 2 inches coming down, just to give it a bit more grip and durability, because it's going to be washed and worn for decades, if not centuries, by the next generation. So you want it to really be strong and stay together. And then I think finally we're going to talk about the blocking. So again, I'm suggesting that you sew all your seams, sew in all your ends, everything except put the buttons on. The buttons are really the very final step. You do that after the garment is blocked and ready to wear. But the best way to block it, the safest way when it's a natural fiber or a mixed blend fiber, is to soak it in a wool wash. There's 2 wool washes that I know of, Eucalan and Soak. I'm a supporter of Eucalan. I've had it in the store for over 25 years now. It's all natural, there's no chemicals. It is made out of eucalyptus oil, and it's made in Canada. And all you're doing is soaking your garment in a bowl or a sink with a little capful of the wool wash. And what that does is lets the fibers settle and lets them bloom. Also takes away any itchiness or unevenness in your stitches. And these 2 samples I did block. So I will bring those up to the camera to show you the difference blocked and unblocked. So you're going to soak it for 20 minutes and then just squeeze out the excess suds, no rinsing. Put it in a nice dry towel, roll the towel up, and then stomp on it or squeeze it with your hands if you have a lot of hand strength. I don't. And then put it onto a dry surface on a dry towel and shape the garment out to the size that you need for your fit. And that's it. Let it dry. This type of yarn will dry very quickly. It'll dry overnight because there's not much density to it. It's very lofty. So I'm going to show you the block sample beside the unblocked piece of work. So this is the honeycomb pattern, unblocked. You can see it's quite elongated, very narrow. And this is what it looks like after it's been blocked. Same needle size, same yarn, same pattern. So the honeycomb has now bloomed and relaxed, and it's giving its final shape and size. And here you can see it's still very tight and elastic. And when I compare the softness of unblocked against blocked, the blocked one is definitely softer because the fibers have settled. They're not poking out in all directions. They've sort of kind of like pine needles in the forest. They're just laying flat on the ground, whereas here the pine needles would be poking out on the branches. And if you're having a hard time getting the size that you require on the cabled cardigan, option number 3, you can pin it. There are something called blocking pins, and I've shown those before on videos. And those can be used to, when your garment is wet and it's in the drying process, to pull out length and width wherever you need it. And you'll be surprised when you have a really good quality wool like this one, you'll be surprised how much larger you can block it out to if you need to, and it doesn't damage the fibers. They have memory and they'll stay in that size and shape. Okay, so let's move on to our trivia. I really had fun with this week's trivia. So knitting hiccups was leading me to remember who the fastest knitter is in the world and how many stitches can she knit. So there's actually two of the world's fastest knitters. One is documented in the Guinness Book of World Records, so she holds the title officially, and her name is Mirjam Tegels. She is from the Netherlands, and she knits continental style, which is the way I knit. So continental style is where we hold the yarn in our left hand. It looks a little bit like crochet. And we hold our index finger up, and then we just sort of pick at the stitches. So if we're purling, our fingers in front, and if we're knitting, our fingers at the back. It is a very efficient way to knit and purl, but it's not the way that everybody knits. It depends on your country of origin or the origin of the person who taught you to knit. So that's Mirjam Tegels. So she is from the Netherlands, and her record time is 118 stitches per minute. I'm not sure if any of us could beat her in a competition, but it might be fun to try sometime. And the second world's fastest knitter is Hazel Tindall, and she's a Shetland style knitter. So her method is completely different from continental, and it's a little bit different from the English. I'll try to demonstrate it in a moment. She's actually been knitting longer than she's been reading or writing. She can't even pinpoint how many years she's been knitting. It's that long. She would have learned from generations in her family, mother, aunt, grandmother, great-grandmother. It's always passed down in Shetland. And her method of knitting is actually called the lever style. So it's adapted from the British method, which is what we see mostly in North America as well. So I'm going to show you an example. So there was a point when both top knitters competed against each other, as well as other fast knitters around the world. But it's the two top knitters that really hold the best time. So what they had to do was knit on a swatch, which was 60 stitches per row, so just knitting. And they had to complete as many rows as they could within a 3-minute time. So it's very competitive, and they're allowed to use their needles of choice, but they have to use the yarn that's presented to them by the judge. So Hazel completed 262 stitches in 3 minutes. That's 60 stitches per row. And Mirjam completed 243 stitches in 3 minutes. So if you go by this competition, which was held, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, Hazel actually is the top knitter, but she doesn't hold the Guinness Book of World Record title. So that's a little bit unfortunate. So yes, the lever style of knitting is very much like the British style with the yarn in the right hand, but what they do differently is they have a long needle. They can also do it with circular, but really it's most often seen in Shetland with a long needle, and they firmly plant it either in their underarm, or they'd have a little leather belt, which is passed down through the generations from one knitter to the next in the family. So it's a pouch, and it is a belt that you do up, leather, and the needle end will sit in the pouch, and it doesn't move. So if you can imagine, all your work is done with the right needle. You're getting the idea? This needle never moves. It's just like a lever. So that is the lever style knitting, which has been adapted from the British style of knitting. I have seen quite a few ladies in our classes over the years that do a variation of the lever style, and they have no idea why they do it. And then I usually say, do your relatives come from Britain, or are they Scottish? And then they go, oh yes, yes. So that's where it comes from. sometimes we do a certain technique and we have no idea why we're doing it. But yes, we do have a lot of ladies who can only knit with the long, straight 14-inch for that reason, and they have a hard time adapting to the double point or the circular. It can be done, and I'm going to post the video in the comments below of Miriam's style knitting and also Hazel's. It's really fun to watch. If you blink, you'll probably miss them knitting about 10 stitches. And that leads us to the trivia question for today. This is our final trivia question for this knit along. And it's just a random picked winner, so don't feel that you have to race to your keyboard. Whoever gets the correct answer and is picked randomly will win another ballot, an incentive ballot, which will go into the ballot box, and that gives them an extra chance to win the prize next week. Oh, we've got some yes, the Dutch knitters, they do knit that way. Yeah, there's a different style of knitting for every country around the world, and the nice thing about North America is we have a whole blending technique. So some people have adapted a little bit of the British method into the continental method, and then there's the Portuguese method, the Greek method. There's a lot of different styles. I'm just strictly a continental knitter, and that's the way I was taught when I was very young. Okay, trivia question. Which country has the most knitters per capita? I think I was a little bit surprised by the answer to this trivia question, but it does make sense when you think of the population, the climate, the background, the history, all that. There's a few clues in there. So anybody who'd like to comment with a guess, we'll be waiting for that, and then I will pick a winner just randomly after the video. So I think I've shown you everything I can for the finishing steps for this knit along. I will post the mattress stitch video because that's more helpful seeing it in a proper video, not just me in front of the camera there. And I will post links to the cardigans here. I'll post a link to the shawl, or if there's anything else you'd like to see that's in the background, just put it in the comments and I can help you find it through a link so you can have more information about the pattern. So thanks everybody for joining us for this knit along. Don't forget to come back next week and see who the winner is. 3 p.m. on Friday. It'll be February. It'll be closer to the first day of spring, which is great. And I hope you get back into your knitting mojo and sort out all those knitting issues. I've got to really go home and concentrate this weekend and try to finish the fronts because I feel like I'm ripping out more than I'm knitting. Thanks everybody for watching. Enjoy your weekend.